Hey, praise the Lord, guys. I'm Straw Greenhorn. And in the evening he came with the 12. And as they sat and did eat, Jesus said unto them, Verily I say unto you, one of you that eateth with me shall betray me. Now they each began to be very sorrowful, and to say unto him, one after the other, Is it I? And another said, Is it I? Jesus answered and said, It is one of the 12 that dippeth his hand with me in the dish. Son of man goeth, verily as it is written of him. But woe unto that man by whom he is betrayed. Better it were for that man had he never been born. All right, so here we have a new revelation being given unto the disciples. The betrayal. He's told them many times that, behold, we go up to Jerusalem. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. He has not alluded so far that it would be one of his own. Following the story, you would expect him just to be, betrayal would mean just like something more general. It wouldn't mean something so deep that cuts so close. Maybe him just going about and just ended up in their hands. Them coming to take him as they originally planned to do. This just goes to show that sometimes the God, He'll give you the plan, a general outline from a further date, but then as you get closer and closer, He could give you more details. They often say that it's because if you knew the plan on the route, maybe you wouldn't want to go through it. Maybe it would overwhelm you. Maybe there would be so much more concern. So we see this principle operating right here. So we're leading up to that great moment. We just saw. So how do we end up here? Now we're actually eating the Passover. It was just told that on the first day on the feast of unleavened bread, when they killed the Passover, He sent them, saying, "Go you over into the village over against you. There shall meet you a man bear a pitcher of water, follow him. Whether he so he going to say unto the good master, the Lord said, Where is thy Geshem that I may eat the Passover with my disciples? He'll show you a large upper room furnished. There make ready." Before that he had been anointed in the house, the woman with the alabaster box ointment of spikenard, very precious. When she broke it and she, began to anoint his body, there was some that had indignation, saying, "Why wasn't this sold and given, to the poor?" Jesus rebuked them. Why trouble ye the woman? She had wrought a good work on me. Verily I say unto you, wheresoever this gospel shall be preached throughout the whole world, this shall she had done shall be so for a memorial unto her. Before that we saw where the chief priests and elders, they had began to conspire against them. They said, "Lest, not on the feast day, lest there be an uproar of the people." We just got done explaining all the signs, wars, rumors of wars, being delivered up into the temple to be beaten, being brought before kings and great rulers, brother betraying the brother unto death, father the son, children rising up against their parents, causing them to be put to death. When you see the abomination and desolation standing in a place where it ought not, as spoken by Daniel the prophet, that him that is in Judea flee to the mountains, him that is on the housetop, let him not go down to the house, nor take his garment. He that is in the field, let him not return to the house for his clothes. Pray that your flight be not into the winter. Woe unto them that give suck in those days. Many false prophets shall arise and false Christ, and shall, deceive, if it were possible, the very elect. But be ye comforted, for I have told you and warned you of all these things. Revelation describes him as the perfect Lamb of God, slain from before the foundation of the world, and letting us know that before God had even made the world, he was already slain. If you know the story of Abraham, when he prayed for a son, he prayed at 75. He didn't get him until he was 100. God tested Abraham, saying, take that only son and offer him up to me. Abraham took his son to the mountain. Just as he was about to do it, God showed him a ram in the bush. One could argue that it was at this place that Jesus spiritually took Abraham's son, place of Abraham's son Isaac. That ram in the bush, it came from somewhere and it meant something. If you were to give him Jesus right there to sacrifice, how would that have looked? Would many people be ready to receive something like that? Because essentially that's what happened. But God, he doesn't operate in time. And God, he can cover things and show you something else when they were in the way. Balaam took to go to King Balak because he wanted him to curse Israel. The donkey saw the angel standing in the way, but he didn't. God, he's able to do, all things, exceeding and above. So here is the reason why Jesus came into this world. He's getting closer and closer to that moment. So, here is the Last Supper. We know the Last Supper is where he revealed the betrayer. We know if you read the Gospels, it will give you two indicators that he used to show who it would be. In one, it said, "To whom he dipped and gave sop." To the other one, it said, "Him that dipped his hand with me in the dish." Here's where we get communion, where he taken the bread and gave to them. "This is my body, which is broken for you. This is the wine of the new covenant, which is shed, for you guys." And so we see really in a private gathering here. Was it only the 12? We know Jesus, he had the 12 with him always. But then, there were, another set, of his disciples that often went with him. And, as I'll get to it, you'll notice that by the language that he uses, you could raise the question: was he there with them only, or was there a more gathering of more? Like I said, he just sent two of his disciples, to go find this large upper room, the guest chamber. And there they made ready. So when the evening was come, he come out with the 12. In the Jews, their days they start with the evening and ends with the morning. The evening is the mark, the beginning of a new day. If you notice in creation, in Genesis, I already said this. God, when He created something, He would always say the evening and the morning were the first day. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. The Spirit of the Lord moved upon the face of the water and said, "Let there be light." God saw the light that it was good. God divided the light from the darkness. The light He called day, the darkness He called night. And the evening and the morning were the first day. It continues to go like that throughout every day, the evening and the morning. So here we see them gathering in the evening. So when the evening was come, He sat down with the 12. All right, so there's my answer. Not paying attention. So it was just the 12. I believe that's why He listed the order. He just gave a parable, telling them to watch and pray. For you know not when, the good master cometh. He said at evening, then at midnight, then at the cock crowing, then during the day. It was listed in this or specific order. And here is another reason why. Because He sat down at them at evening. It is a very, important day. And as they sat and did eat, Jesus said unto them, "Verily I say unto you, one of you that eateth with me shall betray me." So now, Him having, told them so many times that He's about to be taken, that He's about to, be put to death. They're always filled with sorrow, and it always goes over their head. Yet and still, the next time He would tell them, it's like He's starting from ground zero. They're never able, to keep a record, to build on what, He has already told them. So as they sat and did eat, so, this is the Passover, the symbolism of when they were leaving Egypt. I already explained this story many times, how they were told to slay the animal, put the blood on the doorpost, and then eat with their sandals on their feet and their staff in their hand, ready to leave, because that's the night that they would leave. So as they sat and did eat, He said unto them, "One of you that eateth with me shall betray me." So, like I said, this is new information being given unto them. They knew, in theory, they knew that, because He told them many times that He was about to be taken. Even though it doesn't really register. If you can tell by their reaction, it doesn't really register. So now here's more information. One of you shall betray me. One of you that eat it with me. Like it just said, He sat down with the 12, so it's just them. So now you can imagine, looking from the other perspective, that's not the betrayer, how, ridiculous this looks. If you can understand it from their perspective. Yeah, we know the story and we've heard it a million times. It's been there for 2,000 years. I promise you that any person of any faith can maybe, tell you about this story. I would ask if the Muslim man, he could tell you this story. If the Buddhist could tell you this story. The Confucianists, if the Hinduist could tell you this story, right? So, them having been around Him for so long, watching Him do all these, wonderful things, having gotten the revelation that He is the Christ. Simon Bar Jonah, blessed art thou, flesh and blood hath not revealed this, unto you, but my Father which is in heaven. And verily I say unto you, thou art Simon Peter, and upon this rock I shall build my church. Judas, he was there for that. Judas was there when He resurrected Lazarus from the dead, when He fed the multitude with the fishes and the loaves. Judas was there when He walked on the water. I think why it's also so hard. Remember, He just sent them out two by two, giving them power over unclean spirits, to heal all manner of sickness and diseases, to cast out devils. And, Judas, he was paired with someone, right? It does not give a record of how He paired them in none of the Gospels. Who went with who? Did He pair the brothers like Simon Peter and Andrew, and then James and John? No other were brothers. So, pairing them up like this, you would, assume that everybody's good, everybody's clean. You would assume a lot of things. You would assume that we were a unit and that we were all working towards the same goal. You would assume that we were interchangeable and we could, accomplish the same things. They're having so much trouble grasping even simpler things. I mean, the deepness of this one, the depth of this one. They're having so much trouble grasping, the smaller things. Then how much more, would they, have difficulty in understanding why He needed a betrayer, why there had to be a betrayer. Just so I don't forget. He's about to say, unto whom that dippeth his hand with me in the dish. But like I said, in the other one of the other gospels, it said, to whom I shall dip and give sop. Having heard the Jewish tradition, broken down, it was told that it was usually the oldest that was dipped and given sop, which was supposed to have been Simon Peter. I once heard this, interpretation and explanation about the, their customs. It was customary for the oldest to receive the sop, which should have been, Simon Peter. Remember, the devil came to Jesus saying, that he desired Simon Peter to sift him as wheat. But Jesus said, I have prayed for you that your faith fail not, right? Sometimes this devil, he's looking, and if he doesn't get what he wants, he goes on to the next person. So where Judas should have been holding it down, where Judas should have been as, eagerly, pursuing everything that Jesus was giving him. He was busy stealing from the bag, so it was easy to fall on him. Because he was the one that stole from the money bag. Sometimes we do things and we open up a door for other things to enter in. So really I say unto one of you that eat it with me shall betray me. So you know that this is very grave news. Looking at all of us, if you were to understand what's happening right now in human psychology, this is where we project. This is where we project, who we are onto other people. We project our identity. We project our desires. We project our values onto others. So, them having been with Jesus throughout all these things, when they looked on each other, that's what they were doing in this moment. They were projecting. I know I would never, do this. Why? What would be the benefit to me for betraying, my Lord and Rabbi? And they each began to be very sorrowful and to say unto him one after the other, Is it I? Lord, is it I? So now, like I said, we're each, walking together at this point. We assume that we're all believing the same things, that we're all the same identity, we have the same heart. We all assume that we are having the same goal, that we're all heading in the same direction. So, them being who they are, it's so hard for them to grasp that one of them would want to do this. And, that's why God, He really is our overlooker. He is our protector. Because being who you are, having people around you that mean you no good. There's a saying that projection is perception. What the mind doesn't know, the eyes can't see. Human basic psychology is that we project. We project into our environment. So now having somebody like this among them is his job to protect, them from him. This is a wolf in sheep's clothing. So they began to say, Lord, is it I? Is it, each one unto him. Now can you imagine Judas saying, Lord, is it I? What I believe. I wasn't there, but I can tell you what I believe. I believe that in this moment, Judas, he got caught up in the emotions. He got caught up in the emotions of being with Jesus. He got caught up in the emotions of being with everybody else. He got caught up in the emotion of who they were. Their purity, their goodness, the good heart and good souls that they had. He got caught up and swept away in that. I honestly believe that he forgot that he just went onto the chief priests and elders, saying that he would betray him unto them, then promising to give him money. Right after he got upset because the woman with the alabaster box of ointment of spikenard, when she broke it, she poured it on Jesus' head. Wanting her to have just brought it to them so that they could sell it and give the money to the poor. So I believe in this moment that he got swept away in the emotion of everything that was happening. If you can imagine, Jesus right now, he know that he's about to be taken. How do you think that he's looking on the disciples? How do you think he's looking on them? How do you think he's speaking to them? It's with a deep longing, right? It's with a deep sigh. You ever spoke, if you ever watch interviews when they like, show you somebody that's on death row that it's their last couple hours, before they're put to death. And you'll see how they speak, how they communicate, the vibe they give off and the emotion. It's very captivating. You don't know this person or even understand why they did what they did. But in that moment, you connect with them. It's like, you see, something. This person is about to be, taken. They're about to leave this world. The Bible, it does not give you, insight into how he felt right now. He didn't just, say, very last thing unto one of you shall betray me. I imagine the things that he was talking about. He might even been, reminiscing with them, telling them their good qualities. I'm remembering right now, Israel, Jacob, when he was down in Egypt, right before he died, and he blessed all his sons. So did Judas forget, what the deal that he just made, with these guys? Or was he really a sociopath to look in Jesus' eyes and say, "Is it I?" What if that was the case, then you could see that he would have done it because of embarrassment. And again, being swept away by the emotions. How is it that we all are gonna be on this page? How did you find yourself on that page? What were you thinking? How could something like this come about in you? So they each began to say unto him, Is it I? Is it I? Is it I? I had a revelation while reflecting, and I understood that at the end, when he separates the sheep from the goats, he puts the goats on the left and the sheep on the right. He says to the sheep, Well done, good and faithful servant. I was being faithful over a few things. I made thee ruler over many. I was, hungry, you gave me meat. Thirsty, you gave me drink. I was naked, you clothed me. A stranger, you took me in. I was sick, you came to minister unto me. I was in prison, you visited me. And he shall say unto the goats on the left, depart from me. And then they shall say, when saw we these things and helped thee not? In another parable, they even began to reason, did we not prophesy in thy streets? Did we not cast out devils? And all these things. The Bible says there's a way that seemeth right unto a man, but end thereof is destruction. Understand that there's hardly a person that goes to hell that believed that they were going to hell. There's hardly a person that's in wrong that believes that they're not in wrong. There's hardly a person, and if you can, put these two concepts right next to each other with how Judas is reacting right now. Lord, is it I? It's to understand that the human mind, it can do a bunch of evil and still, not believe that it's wrong. It can do a bunch of wrong and even be in the position to do wrong and still believe. That's why the Bible says that there will be weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth. Because they never saw it coming. As bad as they were, they still didn't see it coming. That's why God, He is judge. And God, He directs the heart. Every man's way is right in his own eyes. But what? But the Lord weigheth the spirit. It's just basic psychology. And I say that this is my theory. That this comes from being your parents' child. Because when you were little, it was all about you, right? They loved you, they provided for you. They had your side in things. This comes from having been your parents' child. So now you carry this with you, never having matured to understand that you're a part of society now. And you gotta do right unto others, right? You gotta be careful how you treat people. You gotta be careful of the things you do. You're not just a little child now that mom and dad, they come and they lift you out of any and anything. Because mom and dad, they loved you no matter what, right? So now we have a adult that they, because remember, as a child, you were just a little child, and you did, childish things. And your parents, they took care of you. Your parents provided for you. Your parents clothed you, fed you, protected you. Anything that needed to be led, towards or guided away from your parents, while you didn't worry about anything really. You just went on in the background. You just went on in the background and did whatever. So now we have, people running on in the background doing whatever. And they haven't, made that connection to disconnect from their parents, being full grown adult, male and female. Because Judas saying, is it I? Can you not see this child who, he just runs around the house, playing with his toys. Parents taking care of him. It's the parents that go to work, right? It's the parents that pay these bills. It's the parents that runs the house. It's the parents that feed him, that bathe him if he's young enough, that change his clothes. So now, because remember, as a child, it didn't matter what you did, everything was going to be all right. So now look at Judas, just having gone to make this deal with the chief priests and elders. Now unable to see consequence that is having, or that is going to have. Him saying, Lord, is it I? I really see him saying to his parents, it's almost like he's saying, am I responsible for the light bill? And them saying, no, you don't worry about stuff like that. We're your parents and we take care of you. Just a little child, run and play with your toys. Lord, is it I? If I was to get inside of his mind, see what he was thinking and why he was thinking what he was thinking, how he ended up thinking what he was thinking, how he thought he could, get away with what he was thinking. I would reason on these things, because he's doing things and then, thinking that it doesn't have a definition. That's really what's going on. Things that he's doing, it doesn't have a definition. He's just, he's just he's just, going about. But then the things that he does is neither right nor wrong. And that's why things like this happen. So they began to say unto him, one after the other, Lord, is it I? So is Judas, like I say, is he just such a sociopath that he can do this and still not see that it was his actions that is going to lead to this? Did he forget that he made this deal? Like I say, either he got caught up in the moment of the emotion of Jesus being hours before being taken, what emotions he was giving off. The other disciples there enjoying the Last Supper with him, not knowing, still not receiving that he's about to die. They'll make a social media joke where they show like the wife bringing food to the husband, and then the husband looks to her and say, my love, I'm sorry for what I said today. Maybe I was thinking rashly, and now that I thought about it, he apologizes to her, say, I'm sorry. And then he's about to eat, and she takes the plate, and she said, no, don't eat that. And she goes and throws it away, right? I know it's a joke, but if you look at that, what is that showing? That, she made a decision earlier that was rash. She wanted to get back at him. But then, now that we're in this setting, I see how much I'm regretting this thing. I wish I had, I can't, believe I did it. I wish I didn't do it. And this Jesus answered and said unto them, it is one of the 12 that dippeth with me in the dish. So in this one, it speaks about dipping with him in the dish. So anyone could have done that. But in the other, the Gospels, they have slight variations. If you can understand, these were written, many years apart. So it is he that dippeth his hand with me in the dish. So now this is a sign. It just so happened. If I was to give my, reasoning on this, I would say, Yeah, it just so happened that this happened for Judas and him at the same time. If it was somebody else, he could have said something that it meant like, it is he that he will finish our drink at the same time. Maybe it could have been, him and Simon Peter that finished their drink at the same time. It could have been, well, it's me and him that finished our meat at the same time. Would have been another disciple. I believe that this is just it just so happened, right? It is he that will break the plate. Maybe one of them broke a plate. It is he that will have the last of the beans, the last serving of the beans. He will finish it. The same as he that shall betray me. If you were to look at things that the disciples did all that night, you could find. I'm reasoning we could find something that it would apply to them. But since it was Judas, he that dipped it with me in the dish. And then again, you can also argue that, well, if Judas was a thief, maybe he was greedy also. He would have been dipping in that dish, just, eating. Why is he always dipping in the dish? Maybe Judas is dipping in that dish with everybody. For the Son of Man goeth, as it is written of him. But woe unto that man by whom he is betrayed. Good it would have been for that man had he never been born. So we know that he came here, to pay for our sins. So he had to die. We know that this devil is a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour, and that he's gonna see death of Jesus as him winning. The devil, he does not understand God's plan. I once heard a speaker say, "You can't bury a seed. A seed is planted. You bury dead bodies. A seed is planted." He thought he was burying Jesus. No, a seed is planted. Another speaker said that God, he planted one seed, one son, reaped many sons and daughters. If you look at the story of Job, what did the devil say? Does Job serve thee for naught? Put now thy hands to him, and he shall curse you to thy face. Because the devil, one thing we have to understand about him. I just spoke about projection, right? That's not limited to human beings. These spirits, they also project. In the beginning, the devil, he wanted to be God. But no, you can't be God. You didn't make me, I made you. His heart, he had his heart so set on it. There's nothing he wouldn't have done to try and claim it. With each failure, he revised. Okay, all right, so that didn't work. Let's try this instead. I believe he's still trying. So with him projecting, having no morals, having no honor, no decency, having no humanity, no respect. This guy, he doesn't respect or cherish anything. A lot of guys on the internet, they're complaining that, females, that, all they want is money. They have no morals. They'll mess around with many guys while bringing nothing to the table. And while, that is where we have ended up in society, there's still good ones. There's still, people that will love you for you. But you see what the devil he's doing? He's so materialistic. If God doesn't give you riches, then why should you serve him? If God doesn't, X, Y, and Z, then why should you serve him? He has, no grasp of the concept of loyalty. He has no grasp on the concept of love. That a person can just be a good person and want good people around them. No, it's got to be about something. It's got to be some scheming, plotting to get riches, plotting to get fame. I got to be pretending. I can't have a good heart. I got to pretend to lure people in so then I can destroy them. Have people stop analyzing the character and the morals of this guy. He will curse thee to thy face. No, that's you, devil. So the Son of Man goeth as it is written of him. Because, the direction this devil is going, this is what's going to happen to him. And he's going to use everybody that he can to make it happen. Not knowing that he's releasing the seed. More importantly, the blood. And what does Jesus' blood really show? I know he is the Son of God, perfect Lamb of God, and it requires a perfect lamb. But what does it show? It shows that he came to die for people who eventually treated him like this, who turned their back on him, who spit him, who beat him, who thought the worst of him as much as all the great things he did for them. Showing that, Jesus' character, how it's different, how he would have loved, how he would have given, and not be about money, not be about materialistic things or fame or wealth, not be about all these, external, superficial things that the devil, he is so much about, that a person can love and love a person just for loving a person. That a person can be good without trying to trick somebody or scheme. That a person can just have a good heart and a kind nature and look to help and just love God. You love God as if he was a person next to you. But woe to that man by whom he is betrayed. Better it would have been for him had he never been born. I've seen prophets say that, Judas, he goes with Cain. Cain that slew Abel, the first murder in the earth. Brothers. I've heard them say that, Judas, he goes with Cain. Punishment. So better for him had he never been born. And I could get, deeper down into just how he betrayed him for no reason. But like I said, this was opened by him stealing from the money bag. Why was he stealing from the money bag? Man, sometimes maybe that's who he was. That's who he grew up to be. It was just a habit that he did. Maybe it was just a bad decision in a bad moment that it took on a life of his own. But there was a door that this serpent came in. And that's all she wrote. I am Straw Greenhorn.